This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We're starting today's programming with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. He joins us for a grain market update where he warns that reports dropping on the 12th of the month could lead to some potential volatility in the markets, and that La Niña weather patterns continue to be of concern not only in the U.S., but globally as well. Also ahead, upcoming workshops focusing on helping small-scale meat, poultry, and egg producers alike in Kansas will be occurring in February. Cherokee County Agent Helwig joins us at Agriculture Today to preview the events where attendees will learn key marketing strategies and best practices from experts. We end with an agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Redmond. He discusses the snow received in parts of the state over Christmas and the warmer temperatures we can expect in the week or so ahead. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with our friend Dan O'Brien. He is a K-State grain economist joining us for our weekly grain market update, and it's our first one of the year. So first and foremost, Dan, happy 2023.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So thanks as always for joining us. I really do appreciate it. And let's start the program a little bit differently than we usually do. We didn't really get the chance to do a huge review of 2022 last time we spoke. So maybe let's start with some general themes that we saw throughout the past year.
Well, I think for all these markets, we certainly saw a major run-up in all ag commodities, particularly the grains, when the Ukraine-Russia war had hit, and saw highs, for instance, in the corn contract. We got up to, about 824, 825 in terms of where the lead contract was. For soybeans, we'd gotten up to about 1730 thereabouts. For hard red winter wheat, I know on the March contract, we saw a high up to 1376. It was, again, reminding us of the old days of 2007, 2008, when we saw such highs in some of those same contracts. But after that, the tensions subsided, or at least we became used to them, and there weren't quite as many fears that there wouldn't be any grain coming out of Ukraine to help support world corn exports and world corn, wheat, and oilseed markets. Then we saw a fair decline. We did not have tremendous crops necessarily. We had dry conditions in the western corn belt, but the fear and trepidation ratcheted down some. So we saw prices come down lower to levels that now we've kind of become, more used to, and closed, for instance, for the March contract, 652 3/4. Now, 652 3/4 for March close yesterday is historically $1 to $2 higher than we maybe would have expected prices to be, but that's now where we're at. And maybe if there's a story in corn, it's to watch, again, not the upfront so much, but what, as we wind through 2023, as we have planting risks and fears, and no doubt there'll be some weather concerns somewhere along the line. Will the 591 that Dece 23 corn closed at on Friday, will that be where we end up at? We can talk about that more later if you'd like. And for soybeans, again, January is now in the delivery mode. I closed at 1466 3/4. The March contract 1470. And again, similar story to corn. The new crop November is down to 1382. So already, just like corn, there's some expectation being built into the markets that, we know we've had high prices, we've got a lot of volatility going on, but we expect things to be a little bit better in terms of the supply-demand balance. Is a little bit worse for prices by the time we get to the end of the year. Kansas City hard red winter wheat, a little more level across the upfront versus deferred contracts. March closed yesterday 839 3/4. New crop July down only to 830 3/4. And again, we can talk global issues in the wheat market, but we are so impacted here by the dryness that we've seen in the last part of 2022 that really it's a question of even if the La Niña weather pattern were to recede, how much damage have we had to the ability of the hard red winter wheat crop in the western half of Kansas and down into Texas and Oklahoma? How much can that crop recover? We had some hard freezes that did all this. And really, that I think we're probably getting more into what Romulo Lulato could talk about than myself in terms of the physiological issues, and Lucas Hagen and others. So you kind of piece all that together and kind of get a picture, get some idea of where we might go grow in 2023. And in a nutshell, what we just talked about, we have enough worries about wheat that we're not sure how much we can recover and how much lower prices can go. But at the same time, we are more optimistic right now for corn, for grain sorghum, for soybeans in the U.S. overall, and are probably anticipating more of if there's a chance of something that, if you remember, it used to be called a normal crop year. If there's a normal year coming up, there's a little higher probability of that than we'd had before.
Those do, in fact, exist still. I don't know if other places in the U.S. actually experience those anymore either. And like you said, a little bit more optimism when it comes to some of those crops that have yet to be planted this year. But you mentioned, obviously, weather being a huge part of that. La Niña weather patterns are hopefully going to break sometime soon in the near future. So once again, we'll just have to wait and see how that carries out.
It's a two-edged sword for our farmers in western Kansas. We'd be hoping that the dryness caused by La Niña would recede some. And in fact, here on January the 3rd, the U.S. Climate Prediction Center came out and projected, depending on which report of theirs you look at, either 71 or 75% chance that we'll return to more of what they call an ENSO neutral situation instead of a La Niña positive one. That generally when we get such dry conditions as we'd had with coming up from the south into Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, to see dry conditions coming up affecting our crops, and also seeing the similar dry conditions down in parts of South America. I guess, again, the anticipation is that once we get out into the February, March, April timeframe, that we'd be a little less prone perhaps to have La Niña cause dry conditions. Now, up to this point, you have dry conditions in Argentina, and that's affected their productivity. And you have some dry conditions in the southern part of Brazil, but generally they still have expectations for things to the north of that. In fact, one of the issues that's keeping a lid on prices right now in the U.S. is that South American soybean crop is coming up, and so far their second crop corn, which is export-oriented, it's generally looking okay too. That could change around. But if that doesn't happen, you have those crops really competing hard against U.S. exports and not supporting a price run-up as we'd seen. If that occurs, Samantha, then the risks and worries that we have in the U.S. coming into a planting season will probably be on people's minds. And seasonally, we tend to have some of our highest prices coming out of March, coming out of April into May, into early June, while we're most worried about what the crop will be. And it'd be hard to bet against that this year. In fact, anybody still holding these crops is betting on that very thing, that there'll be seasonal strength out into the spring and that they'll get more reward than they have now for holding their grain. But we shall see. How can we say that type of strength of seasonality won't occur again? But if it does occur, and if these international factors aren't supporting it, maybe the way to look at it is that on the backside of that, it could be late May, it could be early June, we're at risk to see prices fall off out of that seasonal strength if there aren't these international demand issues coming into play. We only quickly mentioned the Ukraine-Russia war, and that's not done. It's not over with. And the Ukraine has come in and stated that whatever they had this year, they're down in terms of their expectations. Less fertilizer, they have less area, et cetera. But it doesn't seem that at this point that the world is paying as much attention to it as it was at the height of those fears last spring. And maybe it's a matter of psychology or something until something comes to shake confidence even more than it had been and recovered. It seems that it's kind of just an ongoing thing that's happening over there.
Sure. Yeah, I think, the media frenzy at the beginning, obviously it was on the minds of many. And like you said, it's kind of dwindled now over time. But I think that's just the nature of media, unfortunately, these days in a lot of ways. But Dan, I don't want to add fuel to the volatility fire, I guess, here to speak. But we have some reports that are going to be coming out January 12th that are going to lead to some potential volatility that we're concerned about. So let's talk through those.
Yeah, and for Kansas farmers, it's good to know when those dates that new information is coming where prices could be caused to move. And on the 12th, you'll have a number of major USDA reports. Again, the annual crop production summary for all these crops except for wheat. They can add that in September. But annual crop production summary, and we have seen a habit of late for the USDA to come in and ratchet down the size of the previous year's crops by 50, 80 million bushels. And that would carry over onto the balance sheets and all sorts of things. You have the stocks reports that'll give, especially for corn, some idea of how much corn and grain sorghum feeding we've had, so that'll be worth watching. There'll be the winter wheat plantings report. I think canola's in there too, to give us some idea of not just how many acres are planted, but maybe some better picture of maybe where we're going in terms of how many will be harvested. Major question on that. We're starting to get towards the answer to the question of, did we plant wheat to grow wheat, or did we plant wheat to protect ourselves and make sure we had the crop insurance income? And, that's not a popular way to say it in U.S. Department of Ag circles, but that's, I think, what people were doing to survive out here. So you got that, and there's the potential for some whipsawing back and forth if, I think we should expect some changes, but are they large, particularly in the size of crops, to come in and affect things? And ongoing issues with our poor export performance that probably will eventually come into play with the USDA cutting back their export projections, ending up raising stocks we have for the old crop marketing years. And you tend to think if nothing else happened, they just did that, that'd be a negative for grain markets.
Definitely a date to mark on your calendar, like you said, for producers that keep up with these sort of things, and something to be mindful of for sure. And Dan, I know that we usually talk about local prices during our program throughout the time, but we're running short on time today, so we'll have to save that for the next time that we speak. But if producers are tuning in and they're looking for that information, I know you share that online, so where can they find that at?
That'll be on the AgManager website, www.agmanager.info. And what I'm watching, frankly, and what you and I will probably be talking about coming weeks, will be what the forward contract prices are for these crops versus what the estimates of cost of production are. So, again, we're looking at profitability prospects and how that might affect plantings as we head off into 2023.
Absolutely. Lots of things hanging in the balance right now, and I'll link to that in the show notes of today's show, which can be found on agtoday.net. So if you're looking for that information, be sure to check it out there. But Dan, as always, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Samantha. Take care.
Absolutely. You as well. Once again, that was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien joining us for this week's Grain Market Update. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by a county ag agent out of Cherokee County. His name is Dale Helwig, and he's joining us to talk through some local workshops that are coming up that I feel will be of major interest for listeners tuning in. So first and foremost, Dale, thanks for joining us today.
Appreciate it, Samantha. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about some workshops that are coming up, but specifically they're workshops that are focused on local meat marketing techniques for producers. So what's the significance of local marketing?
So with local marketing, folks can actually get a little bit more money from their animals by doing it locally and sourcing that meat. And also, one of the main reasons is, for these small producers that only have 5, 10, 20 head, they go take those animals to the stockyards. They're not going to get the best price because they don't have the quantity of animals there. And then you're paying the commission charge. So when you add all that up, when you look at their bottom line, they're not making a lot of money. But if we can take those animals, source them locally, people are willing to buy local meat, we can make a few more dollars, keep them in business a little longer, and actually build some relationships there in the community through this.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, obviously beef cattle, there's a huge market there when it comes to this industry, but there's other avenues as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. Goats are really becoming very popular, and people are really wanting the goat meat. And we also have poultry, those chickens and egg production. We're going to talk a little bit about the egg production at these meetings, but we're also going to talk about marketing poultry. And there's some other guidelines whenever you start marketing poultry. And swine, a lot of people love their bacon. So we're going to be able to hopefully help them source that meat locally.
Absolutely. So I feel like COVID, especially, we kind of saw a heightened in awareness of consumers looking for local products, local, meat markets, things of that sort. So is that really why it's important for businesses to understand now what it takes to enter these markets?
During COVID, we really learned a lot, and the market really shifted during COVID. And everybody's probably familiar with Shock Kansas Farm and how that exploded with local meat. You couldn't find meat in the groceries because some of the meat packers shut down and they were real expensive. And so people started moving to find local meat close to home. And to stock their fridge. People were really stocking up at that time. And so that really produced that market opportunity there for a lot of producers. The problem was packing. You couldn't find a processor. Sometimes it was a year out for you could get an animal in there, but that's kind of lightened up. but there's still an opportunity to sell those meat locally, and people tried it, they like it, and it's continuing to be a big market in the area.
Absolutely. And you mentioned just the opportunities there are kind of endless. And I guess here the next question is, or what are the keys to success to entering in this market? Obviously, it's quite different, but are there, specifics when it comes to getting into it that help people with getting their foot in the door?
Yeah, anytime you start something new, there's always those growing pains, and as producers, livestock producers especially, we're really good at growing a product. We can raise anything that we want. Marketing, we struggle with. And how do you reach those local residents to sell that meat? And so that's a big focus on this workshop that we're going to have. And we're going to have David Bisick. He's a nationally known marketer. He's going to come talk. He's worked with Walmart and McCormick Spices, some of the strategies that he's used, some of the strategies that they can develop locally or regionally. So we're going to focus on that marketing opportunity. Facebook is great. There's some problems with that. There's also a lot of other sites out there that will allow you to sell products. So what are those? And just how do you get that message out to your local residents?
Absolutely. We were talking beforehand, and you mentioned that sometimes the regulations are a barrier that people are a little worried of getting into this. So is that something that will be discussed at these meetings as well?
Oh, yeah. No one wants to be in trouble when they go to sell their meat. So we are absolutely going to have Kansas Department of Ag, KDA, will be there with a lot of their people that do this on a day-to-day basis, so they know the do's and don'ts. And there's some caveats people need to know. Like if you're selling an animal in wholes, halves, or quarters, that's allowable through a custom processing plant. And there's not a lot of regulations with that. There are some things you need to know. But then if you go to USDA inspected or KDA inspected meats where you can sell to grocers or restaurants and those type of things, there's some other things that people need to consider, some freezer inspections and handling the meat and sales tax. And so we're going to try to cover all those bases so people know what they need to do whenever they go to sell locally.
Absolutely. Some important things for sure to understand for producers looking to get involved in this way. And we keep talking about this workshop, but I haven't even mentioned when it's going to be yet. There's going to be 3 of them in the coming month of February. So tell us a bit about those, Dale.
So, yeah, we're targeting the eastern side of the state right now. We hope to move it to the western side, but we're going to have 3 workshops on the eastern side of the state. We're going to start February 3rd in Wichita. This will be at the Sedgwick County Extension Office. They're in Wichita, and that'll be February 3rd, and all these workshops will run from 10 to 3. And then at the end of the month, on February 24th, we'll be in Olathe, Kansas. And again, same agenda, maybe a few different speakers, but that'll be February 24th. And then March 3rd, we'll be in Parsons, Kansas at the Southeast Kansas Research Center there in Parsons.
Wonderful. Well, I know you're going to have, like you said, plenty of experts to talk to and even some local producers themselves that have had success in this area. So exciting for those that are interested, for sure.
Yeah, we're going to start out with KDA talking about the regulations and the do's and don'ts, and then we're going to have David Bisick talk about some marketing strategies. But then to wrap the meeting up, we're going to bring in some local producers that's already been doing this, already been successful. Now, some of these are the custom processing where they're selling quarter, halves, and wholes. And some of these people are selling USDA and KDA inspected meat to restaurants and individuals on small cuts. So we're going to have a gamut of people to listen to and talk to, and there'll be a Q&A, so we can definitely pick these panelists' brain as we're going through this workshop.
Great event for sure, it sounds like. And if listeners are tuning in and they're thinking, well, I really need to attend this myself, how can they register for this event, Dale?
You can contact your local extension office. On our local foods website, we do have a registration place that they can come in. There is a $20 charge, but that's mainly for the lunch, and then lunch is going to be locally sourced products there for lunch. So we're going to try to help somebody out wherever we're located at that's selling locally.
Wonderful. I'll link to all of that information in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. So if you're interested in attending the Kansas local meat marketing workshops that, again, are coming up in February at 3 different locations on the eastern side of Kansas, be sure to check that out. But Dale, thank you so much again for your time today. I appreciate it.
Appreciate being here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State Cherokee County Ag Agent Dale Helwig joining us for a conversation on upcoming Kansas local meat marketing workshops. Again, 3 of these Kansas local meat marketing workshops will be taking place across the state of Kansas, with the first occurring February 3rd in Wichita County, February 24th in Olathe, and March 3rd in Parsons. Be sure to register today. Again, the cost is $20 per attendee, which will cover lunch and the workshop itself, which will take place from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at each of these locations. It's an opportunity you're not going to want to miss out on. Now a quick word on the EPA defining waters of the United States from Kansas Livestock Association Vice President of Communications, Scarlett Hagans.
The new regulatory definition proposed in December 2021 attempts to reinstate the pre-2015 regulation, but in reality substantively changes it, posing significant risk to cattle producers and landowners. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association previously called for EPA to retain agricultural exclusions for small, isolated, and temporary water features that commonly appear on farms and ranches. According to NCBA Chief Counsel for Government Affairs Mary Thomas Hart, these exclusions had broad support and were included in WOTUS rules under both Republican and Democratic administrations. The new rule, however, fails to clearly exempt isolated and ephemeral features from federal jurisdiction and relies on case-by-case determinations to assess whether a feature is federally regulated. Hart said it is a far cry from the regulatory certainty provided by the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, creating a significant and costly burden for agricultural producers. She added that the timing of the new rule could not be worse, as the Supreme Court is currently considering Sackett v. EPA, which will provide much-needed clarity related to the waters of the U.S. definition. The Supreme Court is set to issue its decision on the case in spring 2023. Meanwhile, a coalition of national trade associations will seek to halt implementation of the rule in federal court. I'm Scarlett Hagans.
Once again, that was Vice President of Communications with the Kansas Livestock Association, Scarlett Hagans. Also, before we cut to a short break, if you're looking for a fun opportunity for both youth and families alike coming up, mark your calendars for February 12th, because the K-State women's basketball team will be hosting 4-H Day with tip-off starting at 1 p.m. This event includes 2 prize packages, one for $25 and the other for $15. The $25 ticket includes a t-shirt. You can register by reaching out to your local extension office or by clicking the link listed in our show notes, which can be found, as always, on agtoday.net. A link there to that website to register can be found there. Go Cats! If you're listening to us on the radio and are afraid you're going to miss out on our next segment because you're reaching your destination or have something else that you're having to switch to quickly here, don't forget the Agriculture Today programming is also available as a podcast. Our podcast is easily accessible on all podcasting platforms, including our website, agtoday.net, as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. You can simply search us on any podcasting platform, Agriculture Today, Kansas State, and we are more than likely to pop up, and you can follow us there. That way you can simply have us pop up in your regular feed on whatever platform you're using and listen to us more regularly that way. Once again, you can easily access that on agtoday.net or any podcasting platform by simply searching Agriculture Today, Kansas State. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are ending today's programming as we always do with our weekly agricultural weather report. And providing that this week is our K-State meteorologist, Chip Redmond. So, Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And happy 2023. This is our first weather segment back in the new year. So we had some precipitation over Christmas that we didn't get to talk about. So let's talk about that now.
Yeah, we got just perfect timing in Kansas for a white Christmas for a lot of folks. And it really couldn't have been any better. It was obviously associated with the coldest we saw of all of 2022, to be honest with you. And that week-long cold snap was featured with about 2 inches of snow in the Manhattan area. As you got a little bit further south, there was a band of heavier snow through Wichita. But overall, around 2 inches, it was kind of a rule. And even southeast Kansas got into the mix. So just enough to get a white Christmas. You have to have at least 1 inch on the morning observation at 7 a.m. on Christmas morning. And so we successfully did that. And it was the first time in about 6-7 years for a lot of folks across the state, and definitely welcome moisture regardless.
A fun festive sight for sure, too, I'm sure for many. So I guess with that snow in mind, how are we looking in terms of snowfall averages for the state? Did that help any, or are we still behind?
Yeah, so the big exception for snowfall right now, as we look across the state, the Northwest, they've had quite a bit of snow, not like record amounts, but it's near average for the Northwest. Maybe up to your Overland and Rawlins County had a little bit more. Or they've actually had about an inch of moisture in general over the last week. But elsewhere across the state, we're below average snow-wise. The 2 inches Manhattan saw, that's actually only about where we average about 7 inches of snow this time of year. And then our seasonal averages are around that 17, 18 inches of snow, and obviously less as we get further south and east and more as we get north and west. So outside that Northwest, everyone's well below average snowfall-wise. And most recent storm system that we got, it took a big band of snow that would have probably put us all over our normal averages if it would have just been a couple hundred miles south. So a lot of folks to our north and west in Colorado and Nebraska are well above normal. Unfortunately, Kansas kind of missed that boat.
But we didn't miss out on some rain this past week, so that's good news, right? Some precipitation in areas of the state?
Yeah, like I mentioned, the Northwest saw up to an inch of moisture from that snow, which is really great. Some of those areas were in extreme and exceptional drought. As you get further east and south, the moisture was much more sporadic, but mostly associated with thunderstorms. A lot of folks saw thunderstorms there on January 3rd, which is obviously quite rare for this time of year. But as a result of that convective activity, isolated rainfall amounts. We had a band that went from basically west of Wichita up in the northeast Kansas that saw around an inch of rain in that band of thunderstorms. And then again, more along the Missouri border, where they actually had enough this week to add the first area of drought-free conditions in the state that we haven't had anything drought-free in several months. So that's exciting news, that far eastern end of the spectrum, but as a result of that moisture. Manhattan, we got around 0.8 of an inch of rain. And so just to put that in perspective in that one location, on a monthly average for January, we get around 4 to 5 tenths of an inch. So we saw almost double our average January precipitation fall in about an hour with that thunderstorm activity.
Wow, well, somewhat of a step in the right direction. And from what it looks like, we were talking earlier, you said that we might have chances for even more precipitation in the next week or so with temperatures warming up a bit?
Yeah, precipitation chances are going to be there. They'll be slim, though. I don't expect much moisture. Only a few folks will probably see at least a tenth of an inch. It'll be mostly in the northeast and far eastern part of the state, and that'll be in the form of flurries. I don't really see any significant accumulation. Another chance at some light moisture mid-next week, but overall dry conditions will likely prevail for 90% of the state. And temperatures warmer than normal. We've got pretty persistent pattern that's developed with the West Coast getting slammed by storm after storm and high pressure dominating over the central U.S. So calm, about 10 degrees above normal, and mostly dry.
Well, good to know, Chip. We appreciate this update as always and your time.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond providing this week's agricultural weather report. That ends today's programming. We'll be back with more next week on Agriculture Today.